12 years after facilitating the largest national security leak in American history, Edward Snowden remains exiled in Russia, unable to set foot on U.S. soil without losing his freedom.
No, I don't think Mr. Snowden was a patriot.
He is a lawbreaker.
He's a traitor.
I hope we can catch him at some point.
I think the proper outcome would be that he would be given a death sentence.
The U.S. government was illegally surveilling its own citizens, and because of Bush, Obama, and Hillary Clinton, we were on track to become an Orwellian police state. This hasn't happened yet, thanks in large part to Edward Snowden, who deserves not only a presidential pardon, but a hero's welcome home. Once upon a time, Trump shared the establishment view, calling Snowden a spy who should be executed.
I think he's a total traitor, and I would deal with him harshly.
Around the end of his first term, however, Trump changed his mind.
Do you want to give Edward Snowden a pardon and bring him back? You once suggested...
Well, I'm going to look at it. I mean, I'm not that aware of the Snowden situation, but I'm going to start looking at it. There are many, many people. It seems to be a split decision. There many people think that he should be somehow treated differently, and other people think he did very bad things. And I'm going to take a very good look at it.
I think he liked the idea, the kind of flair of it, and wanted to do it.
Journalist Glenn Greenwald says that he was personally involved in discussions with the Trump administration about pardoning Snowden, and at one point, Trump was convinced to go through with it.
I engaged in a huge amount of effort in the transition after Trump lost the election in 2020, before he left the White House, and I know for certain that he came very close to pardoning Edward Snowden. But there were a lot of people I know very close to Trump, who Trump trusts, who Trump listened to a lot, who were strongly advocating for that. There were other people, unfortunately, who Trump also trusted, unfortunately, like Mike Pompeo and a few of those sort of Marco Rubio, a few of those sort of like standard Republican militarists who were adamantly opposed to the pardon of Snowden.
Now Trump has less to lose by angering the GOP establishment than he did in 2021. For better or for worse, he's already shown a zeal for using the pardon power to settle scores, starting with a blanket pardon of the January 6 rioters. He kept his promise to the Libertarian Party by freeing the founder of the dark web drug market, the Silk Road. By pardoning Snowden, Trump could really give the finger to the DC establishment, and incidentally, do the right thing by sending a message to the world in this moment of creeping global surveillance and censorship. Snowden was right. Snowden says that watching the director of national intelligence lie to the Senate in 2013 was his breaking point, the moment he realized he'd be morally compromised if he didn't risk everything to expose the truth.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
That was a witting, bald-faced lie. There's no saving an intelligence community that believes it can lie to the public and the legislators. Seeing that really meant for me there was no going back.
Mr. Snowden's been charged with 3 felonies. If in fact he believes that what he did was right, then like every American citizen, he can come here, appear before the court with a lawyer, and make his case.
But a fair trial was unlikely. Snowden was charged under the 1917 Espionage Act, which was passed during World War I and used to quash anti-war activism, landing socialist presidential candidate Eugene Debs in prison for advocating draft resistance. Under the Espionage Act, the Rosenbergs got the electric chair for selling nuclear secrets to the Soviets. But the law wasn't supposed to apply to whistleblowers exposing government lies, so a judge wouldn't have allowed Snowden to present his rationale for leaking classified information, just as it didn't allow Daniel Ellsberg, who exposed official lies about the Vietnam War, to explain his motivation while on federal trial in 1973.
I wasn't able to say anything about that, or why I felt that it was reasonable to risk my life to get these truths to the American people. Snowden wouldn't have any chance to say any of those things. He couldn't say those to a jury. The prosecutor would say, objection, irrelevant, as in my case. And under the current terms of the Espionage Act, the judge would have to agree. It was never meant to be applied to whistleblowers, as President Obama has now done 7 times.
If Snowden had turned himself in, as Obama advised, he would have faced a show trial. Just look at what happened to Army Private and WikiLeaks source Bradley Manning. He spent 9 months in solitary confinement before standing trial. Manning, who would later identify as Chelsea, ended up serving years in prison before Obama commuted the 35-year sentence.
The United States will always be my home, and I'll always be willing to come back on a single condition, and I've been quite clear about this over the years. This is that the government guarantee that I have the right, and every whistleblower has the right, to tell the jury why they did what they did.
If Snowden had come back without that guarantee, would he have gotten the electric chair like the Rosenbergs?
We've had the traitor Edward Snowden steal that information. He should be brought back from Russia and given due process, and I think the proper outcome would be that he would be given a death sentence for having put friends of mine, friends of yours who serve in the military today at enormous risk because of the information he stole and then released to foreign powers.
There's no direct evidence that Snowden handed material to foreign powers, nor that any intelligence agents were harmed by the published material, which Snowden filtered through journalists like Greenwald. Investigative journalist Edward Epstein wrote a 2017 book, Impugning Snowden, pointing to data Snowden took from the NSA that had nothing to do with illegal surveillance. He implies that Snowden was no hero, just a disgruntled employee who carelessly jeopardized American security.
He was in the palm of the Russian intelligence service's hands. When they have someone in their palm, they're going to squeeze them.
But Epstein's case has some major holes. He alleged that Snowden likely intended all along to trade classified documents to Putin's intelligence forces in exchange for asylum. But Snowden has convincingly argued that ending up in Russia was never his intention, and that the US government trapped him there by revoking his passport. He was actually seeking refuge in Ecuador, and he had to leave Hong Kong because the local authorities threatened him with arrest.
We were traveling to Quito, Ecuador, via Moscow, via Havana, via Caracas, for a simple reason. It was the only safe route available. There were no direct flights to Quito from Hong Kong, and all of the other connecting flights traveled through US airspace. I think everyone would agree, probably including the Russian president himself, that he is an authoritarian leader. I think the Russian government broadly does not have a good record on human rights, and that hasn't changed.
So why does the DC establishment hate Snowden? Because he exposed their lies and undermined their power. Snowden proved that Clapper lied in his Senate testimony, and Obama and his inner circle knew about it. The documents he leaked revealed numerous illegal intrusions on the private communications of millions of Americans, though apparently the senators he spoke to that day already knew that, according to Clapper's former head counsel. It wasn't just cell phone records. Snowden also revealed the existence of the secret electronic surveillance program known as PRISM, in which the NSA forced companies like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and Apple to turn over their users' personal information with secret court orders. He revealed how British and American intelligence collaborated to tap fiber optic cables and break encryption for Google and Yahoo customers without the company's knowledge. He revealed that a program called X-Keyscore created digital fingerprints allowing spies to ID users based on their search patterns and track them, even if they changed usernames or computers. All of this private data was supposed to be stored at a $1.5 billion secret facility in Utah. Collecting a haystack in search of a needle violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unlawful search and seizure. But that was the strategy. It was a collect-the-whole haystack approach, as one insider told the Washington Post. So, the NSA was building the architecture to permanently store the communications of everyone on the internet without the knowledge or consent of the American people. In Snowden's words, the NSA's job was to help create a permanent record on all of us.
A job managing and connecting the flow of intelligence gave way to a job figuring out how to store it forever, which in turn gave way to a job making sure it was universally available and searchable. Engineering a system that would keep a permanent record of everyone's life was a tragic mistake.
That might make catching criminals more convenient, but it also meant violating the privacy of every American and could empower the sort of authoritarian techno-surveillance state that's emerged in China.
We see how these same technologies are being applied to create what they call the social credit system. If any of these family photos, if any of your activities online, if your purchases, if your associations, if your friends are in any way different from what the government or the powers that be of the moment would like them to be, you're no longer able to purchase train tickets. You're no longer able to board an airplane. You may not be able to get a passport. You may not be eligible for a job. You might not be able to work for the government. All of these things are increasingly being created and programmed and decided by algorithms. And those algorithms are fueled by precisely the innocent data that our devices are creating all of the time.
After the Snowden revelations, a federal judge ruled against the intelligence agencies, writing that bulk collection of Americans' phone records exceeds the scope of what Congress has authorized, and that the sheer volume of information collected by the NSA was staggering. Another court considering the surveillance of conservative activist Larry Klayman determined it likely that the NSA's bulk collection program is indeed an unreasonable search under the Fourth Amendment. That would never have happened if not for Snowden's actions, which also inspired congressional reform and, most importantly, brought public awareness, which had all sorts of direct and indirect effects, an outcome NYU journalism professor Jay Rosen termed the Snowden effect. Thanks to the Snowden revelations, Apple branded itself around privacy.
At Apple, we believe privacy is a fundamental human right.
Messaging apps that use end-to-end encryption like Signal and WhatsApp flourished, and major platforms like Facebook incorporated strong encryption into their private messaging. And the public now understands the power of secretive FISA courts to authorize all sorts of spying without any oversight.
I called for a thorough review of our surveillance operations before Mr. Snowden made these leaks.
Should Snowden have just sat on the material and waited for Obama to make these reforms? Maybe filed an internal complaint? He says he tried and got nowhere. Daniel Ellsberg was also criticized for not using official channels, even though he tried to alert Congress that the official narrative about Vietnam was a lie, as if the Nixon administration would have taken his concerns seriously. Henry Kissinger later called Ellsberg the most dangerous man in America. He was wiretapped by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and the president's henchmen even broke into his psychiatrist's office to try to dig up dirt on him. When John Kerry criticized Snowden, he drew a contrast with Ellsberg's patriotism.
There are many a patriot. You can go back to the Pentagon Papers with Dan Ellsberg and others who stood and went to the court system of America and made their case. Edward Snowden is a coward. He is a traitor.
Ellsberg called Kerry's comments despicable.
He calls Edward Snowden a fugitive from justice. I would say that he's right in regarding himself as a fugitive from injustice. That appeared in my own trial 43 years ago. I was not allowed, by the nature of the charges against me under the Espionage Act, to describe my motives, my reasons, the considerations that had led me to break my promise that I'd made to the government many times not to reveal their secrets.
But John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama, like Kissinger, Hoover, and Nixon before them, nevertheless pushed the absurd claim that the government's illegal actions and bald-faced lies could have been addressed by complaining through the official channels.
My preference, and I think the American people's preference, would have been for a lawful, orderly examination of these laws, a thoughtful, fact-based debate that would then lead us to a better place.
But that debate would have never happened if Snowden hadn't forced Obama and the intelligence agencies to admit what they were doing. So why should Trump pardon Snowden? Well, he has first-hand experience with the kind of unaccountable surveillance Snowden exposed. The same secretive FISA court that rubber-stamped the NSA's mass surveillance authorized spying on former Trump advisor Carter Page based on faulty information supplied by the FBI.
Unelected deep state operatives who defy the voters to push their own secret agendas are truly a threat to democracy itself.
It was Snowden who alerted a generation of Americans to this danger. To do this, he gave up a comfortable life, earning a six-figure salary as a government contractor, living in Hawaii with his girlfriend.
You can go to work, you can collect your large paycheck for relatively little work against the public interest and go to sleep at night after watching your shows. But if you realize that that's the world that you helped create, and it's going to get worse with the next generation and the next generation who extend the capabilities of this sort of architecture of oppression, you realize that you might be willing to accept any risk. And it doesn't matter what the outcome is, so long as the public gets to make their own decisions about how that's applied.
The danger Snowden exposed is more present than ever, as the government seeks to spend $500 million integrating AI into key federal agencies and tapping the data analytics firm Palantir to scour a centralized federal database Trump created by executive order. But because Snowden made the public aware of these dangers more than a decade ago, our culture and technology has had time to adapt and figure out ways to protect privacy and evade unwanted surveillance. We owe Snowden an enormous debt, and Trump should let him come home.